Good afternoon. It's a great crowd. My name is David McMahon, and I'm a professor of history here at Kirkwood Community College. And I have the distinct pleasure of teaching a Holocaust course here at Kirkwood and to introduce the Thaler Holocaust Remembrance speaker for 2023, Tova Friedman. Tova Friedman was 4 when she and her parents were sent to a Nazi labor camp from their home in central Poland. She was almost 6 when she and her mother were forced into a packed cattle truck and sent to Auschwitz II, also known as the Birkenau extermination camp. At the same time, her father was taken to the Nazi concentration camp in Dachau. During 6 months of incarceration at Birkenau, Tova witnessed atrocities that she could never forget. She was one of a handful of people to have entered a gas chamber and survived. In her memoir, The Daughters of Auschwitz, My Story of Resilience, Survival, and Hope, Tova recounts her experience to keep the story of the Holocaust alive. Please join me in welcoming our 2023 Thaler Holocaust Remembrance speaker, Tova Friedman.
Oh. Hi. First of all, I'm very, very grateful to be here, to be invited. It's my first time in Iowa, and I want to tell you, I have never met nicer people, but you know, I'm coming from New York, so what do you... The people here are wonderful. They're kind, they listen to you, and they feed you. So I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank you most of all that it's very important for me to share my story. And I'm 84. Some women don't like to tell their age. I'm very proud of it because I never thought I'd make it, you know, to 84 years old. And I don't know how long I'll be here, so that my story is like, it's like once I tell my story, you get my story, and it's in your head. And when I'm not here, you will remember it, because there are always people who are going to deny it, that it never happened. And you know why? I myself sometimes have trouble imagining and remembering that this can happen. When I went back to Auschwitz, I took my grandchildren with me. One of my grandchildren is, oh, he's right here, which is a fabulous thing that I have a grandson with me. I was telling him, he's a twin, and I was telling him of the experiments done on twins. I couldn't believe it. So I, myself, could not believe it. Being in the war, when we were talking about it, we ourselves could not believe it. I remember my father heard about gassing. We were in a ghetto, and he said, "Gassing? They're taking healthy people into a gas chamber, and that's the end of them?" So no wonder that you're going to meet people who don't believe it. Well, I want you to know, you have to believe it, because I am a witness, and that's why I'm so happy to be here. There are very few of us left. From my town, there were hundreds and hundreds of children, beginning of the war. At the end of the war, there were 5 children. Something is happening to the lights. You are disappearing. Where are they? Yeah, I'd like to see them, please. Thank you. I don't like to talk in the darkness. I want to see, so thank you so much, whoever is in charge there. Okay, there were like 15,000 Jewish adults. At the end of the war, there were 200 left. And so you can imagine, right now, I'm the only representative of my entire town. That's it. And once I'm gone, we're done. So therefore, I am so happy that I'm able to share it. Now, why are there so few people like me left? Because Hitler had an idea. I'm going to stand here because I just want to make sure that I'm stable. Um, he had an idea that the enemies of Germany were children. So whenever he came to a town, the first thing he did was he killed the children. Now, in the beginning, the killing was very simple. He'd walk into a room, there were parents and children, and they would shoot them. There wasn't, it's easy to shoot somebody if you don't think of them as human beings. Somehow, the Jews, not only the Jews, there were also gay people, there were also people of color, but mostly targeted the Jews, that we were not human. We were called Untermensch, subhuman. It's easy to kill somebody who's subhuman because he's got nothing in common with you. So why the children? Children, you see, to the Reich, to the big, big Reich with all its ammunition and planes and I mean, all the war material, they were dangerous for a number of things, number of ways. They were dangerous because, first of all, they weren't helpful in any way. They had to eat. Children eat, children get sick, and most important, the parents cannot work so well if they have to take care of children. So get rid of them. But there was another reason, which I haven't read about it, but I'm pretty sure, I'm a therapist. The reason is that children grow up and have memories. And the idea of Hitler was, do not leave any witnesses. In fact, the death machine increased as they heard that the Allies were coming because he was afraid of witnesses. And what are better witnesses than children? They grow up like me. I'm a witness. It just so happened I'm one of the few witnesses left, but because the others were killed. And I'm here by pure luck, I want you to know. I wasn't smarter, I wasn't richer. I'll show you. It's almost like a miracle that I'm here. And that's why I am a witness. So, the first thing I remember myself is being in a ghetto. Let me tell you about the ghetto. Many of you know about ghettos. You concentrate people of the same type of people. They have much in common. Many ghettos are people want to live in a ghetto. In a sense, they want to live with the same people who speak their language. But this was a forced ghetto. They took all of us. We lived in regular apartments. There were very few private homes in that town, but apartment houses and tenement houses. Everybody lived there. My family lived there for generations, for 200 years. My parents, my grandparents, my great-grand, we thought we were pretty good Polish citizens, Jewish, Polish. But they took all of us. The first thing, of course, they did was give us cards to identify us, called Jude, Jew. Jude, Żyd in Polish, Jude in German. And if you went without that card, you were shot. No way. You had to have an ID card. Afterwards, they put bands on us. So we all had to, it were white bands or sometimes different places that were yellow with a Jewish star on it to identify. And if you were caught without it, shot. You see, there was no negotiation. There wasn't, and you thought this is what happens. Later on in the war, they did other things. They started putting things on your clothing so you can be identified in the front and in the back. And at the very end, they tattooed it on your skin. That's the way you couldn't get away anymore. So let's go back into this little town because I want you to feel this. You see, everything I say you have to multiply by 1.5 million children. I am just one child, but 1.5 million of Jewish children were gassed, starved. Drowning was very popular. They would take 2 or 3 people together and put ropes around them and some rocks into the water, and that was the end. And that's how I can save a bullets. Bullets were very precious. Only special people got bullets. The other people were killed in a different way. So here we are. I am living with my mother and my father, which is good, by the way. We still live as a family. Mother and father, and in a ghetto, 20, 30 people in a tiny apartment. Not ours, of course. We were taken from our apartment into this place where you could not leave without like a passport, a piece of paper that if you had permit to work, then you could leave. If you walked out of that ghetto without a permit, you were shot. Shooting was as common. I mean, if you went out of the house, you weren't sure that you'd come back because you don't know what they would find it. I want to tell you a story. I don't always tell it a lot, especially when there are too many children around. I don't see too many. But the ghetto, we were starving, absolutely starving. So mothers would allow little children, let's say 6, 7 years old, to go through, there was a little hole in the wall. You can still see the place if you ever go to that place. As a tourist, they show it to you. But tourist or not, this is what happened. A little hole, and the little kids could go through it, and they would go to some Polish farm or somebody they knew and would get a piece of bread. That bread could sustain a family. So the kids would come back. That would only happen at night. And it's interesting that the mothers knew the terror that the kids may never come back, but you had no choice. I want you to know the choices that we made, my mother also, she told me, were not something that she could think about. There wasn't a thought process. Well, in our town, little town called Tomaszow Mazowiecki, that hole was discovered by a German SS person. And you know what he did? He would let the kids, he watched from away. He would let the kids out. The kids would come back in the middle of the night with a piece of bread or food, anything that he could get on the outside. And as they went through the hole, he would shoot them. And they would die with that piece, with whatever food they had. He became so famous in this that after the war, thank God, he was hanged as one of the criminals. That was his only job, shooting of children. That was he was famous for. So and yet children did it because the hunger in that ghetto, not describable. So the children were the first victims. The second victim were the elderly. Let's see who elderly were. 40, 50 years old. That was considered elderly. Why? Because they couldn't work. Hitler planned out this so beautifully, I want you to know. I have to use the word beautifully because this is not random. The reason we know it wasn't random was because the same plan was carried out in every single Jewish, or a town where there were Jews all over Europe. The same exact process. This process was thought of in Berlin by very brilliant people, by geniuses, by strategists, by professors, by nutritionists, because they knew how much food to give us in order how long we will live. So this is like a system. That's why they were able to kill so many people, because they had a system in place, and it didn't vary from town to town. So every town lost its children. There are no children now at my age. I go to conferences, and there was like a table saying, children survivors at Auschwitz. A few years ago, there were 20. Now I'm 2 or 3 people. So the children were gone. Then the elderly. The elderly, who are the elderly, 50 and over, they couldn't work. The ones that were saved in the beginning of the war were the workers, like the age of my parents. They were 20, 30, around that age, because Hitler used us to do their work. They never dug a grave. My father dug the grave for his parents. And not only he, able-bodied people his age would dig these gigantic, I don't know if you've ever been to Poland, but there are these communal graves that are like twice the size from there to here and twice, very deep, you know. That's where that's where the kids were shot, those who were not shot individually, and that's where the elderly were shot. I remember when my mother's mother, who lived with us in a ghetto, was one day they came in, just took her out. She was shot outside the house. And my mother didn't cover up my eyes. She let me see. Because, you know, in back of her head, she thought my mother, someday we'll be separated. And this little girl, I was the only child, the little girl has to know how to function on her own. So she thought, the more I will know, the more I'll be careful. And she was right. The more I understood my world, the more I'll be able to take care of myself if I had to. So she let me see it. I saw my grandmother, splattered blood outside the house. A little time later, my father came in and he said to my mother, and his tears were coming down, he didn't cry. We never cried out loud, by the way. It was like a no-no. You couldn't hear the voice of crying if you could help it. But he was crying and he said, I just put them on a truck. I knew exactly what that meant. I knew that he had dug a grave, he and other people his age, his group, and all the elderly were taken out of their homes and taken in those trucks, and because the graves were a little bit outside of town. They were not inside, they were outside of town, and that's where they were shot. Now, how? We even know how. You know how we know? Because people talked. In every town, it was the same way. They were first undressed, and we were naked a lot. Why naked? Number of reasons. Again, it was a plan. Listen to the plan of evil. These were educated Germans, educated, who planned out this plan of evil. You took off their clothes, it saved you to undress a corpse, because that corpse would eventually be cremated. They didn't want to have bodies, because what do you do with millions of bodies? But if you cremate a person, it becomes, less and less. When you go to Auschwitz now, and I took my grandkids there's ashes. They still keep the ashes as a memorial. So it was easy to deal with ashes. Now, they took the clothes off, because they also took the clothes and they washed it and sanified. I don't know what they did to the clothing. My mother worked in a factory like that of the clothes, because they sent those clothes back to Germany to their families. Because we came with very nice things. My father was a tailor. We certainly had suits. My mother was dressed well. Everything was taken away. And so the elderly were also gone. So here we live. Just think about it. We live without children and without our grandparents. Then, in order to make it a little bit, that's how they destroyed us psychologically. The questions people once say to me, I'm sure you must have heard it, why did you go to the slaughter like sheep? And that question always bothered me. Were we sheep going to the slaughter? People like us who have never in our lives held a gun. It wasn't a war like it is right now. Wars going on right now. But it was different. Ukraine has an army. It has tanks. It has sympathy. It has money. I'm not saying it's a good war. Please, I'm not saying that. But they have a chance to fight. We didn't have anything. We were taken from our beds. And just imagine what what people want to fight if their children have just been killed in front of them, and their parents also killed. What fight is left in you? So psychologically, we really became um, almost inhuman in a way because we didn't know how do you deal with it? How do you deal with something like that? You have to continue. You can't commit suicide, and you have to go to work. So my first memory is the death of my grandmother, and I knew that I couldn't get. I was under the table. First, for being hidden. Second, it was no space. There wasn't a bed for me or anything because it was so crowded. So I remember voices, and I remember my parents constantly talking to each other about what's going on. So therefore, my memory is very sharp. I don't remember everything, but I remember an awful lot. So my grandparents are gone, and then I hear that there is a terrible disease going on, typhus, because they killed all our doctors. So we had no doctors, Jewish doctors, because and the Germans would not come into our ghetto. A ghetto was a horrible place. It was the beginning of the destruction. Later on, they funneled us into worse places, but the ghetto was the very beginning. People, so typhus killed an awful lot of people without doctors. Children were killed because they don't. There's no reason for them to live. They are a nuisance, and elderly were. So no, and all the teachers. What do you need teachers for, right? There's no school. So all the teachers were killed, all the doctors, and our rabbis. We had no place to turn. There was nobody to go to talk to for help. They have completely destroyed the structure of our society. So go talk to us and say, why did you go to death like sheep? It upsets me when they say that. I don't know how many people would be in our position. There were uprisings, by the way. There were 24 uprisings throughout the war, but just wasn't enough. And you know the biggest one was Warsaw Ghetto. I know some of you, maybe those who take classes with your teacher, must have learned about Warsaw Ghetto. Warsaw Ghetto people fought back. They were able to fight the Germans for 20 days. Poland fell in 1 week, an entire country, and our Jews, young people, they were mostly teenagers, by the way, who fought. 20 days held up against the Germans, and then they were all killed. They had to be. It was in the cards. They were all killed afterwards. So when people tell me, how did you fight? So anyhow, the ghetto where my parents were married there. I was born not far there, but it was our home. It was all gone. And many of the people were sent to Treblinka. And many, many people died from starvation. That's another thing. You see, their machine couldn't kill us fast enough, but starvation did. Starvation is passive death. Just stop feeding people. And that's what I remember. Terrible, terrible hunger. The kind of hunger that there is no words. By the way, everything I tell you, multiply it by 100, because I don't have vocabulary. We, as human beings, do not have the vocabulary to tell you really what was going on. But okay, so let me take you with me, because it's sort of important for you to understand one person, and then you multiply it by 1,000,000. So here we are. Half the people are gone, we know. The streets are full of dead. Starvation, that's in a ghetto. Starvation, diseases, shootings, and the Poles have curtains on their window so they shouldn't see what's going on. Very little help from the Polish population, very little. You can give them all kinds of reasons why they couldn't, they were scared. You could excuse people like that, but they covered up the curtains, the windows, so they shouldn't see. Okay, so here we are, and we heard rumors. Again, information is another source of strength. Information. They kept all information away from us. And but we did hear that they're going to move us somewhere else. The moving of people, thousands of people of different trades and railways, was one of the ways of putting fear into us because we didn't know where we were going. And my mother, for instance, my mother had 9 brothers and sisters. At the end of the war, not a single brother or sister or their children were left alive. She lost 150 close family, not even cousins. I'm not talking about cousins. I'm talking about nieces and nephews, the children of her brothers and sisters. And during the war, I remember my mother said, I wonder what this one is. I wonder what that is. Where is the family? Where did they send them? No way. She died without knowing. They kept people apart. Every town was almost hermetically sealed. No letters. No, if you were found with a newspaper, you were killed immediately. If you're found with a radio, you were killed immediately, because information meant that you knew what was happening. They wanted us to live in fear and terror, like you live in a nightmare that you can't wake up and you don't know the rules, because the rules change all the time. So, but we did hear that they are moving us. And this is exactly what happened. They took all, I'm going to skip a little bit because otherwise it'll be too long, and maybe I need questions, because questions is what you learn, and I can answer them. So here they told us all to get out of our barracks. It was, well, they weren't really barracks. The barracks came later. They were really regular apartments, but they were in terrible condition. Can you imagine 20 people with one bathroom, the hygiene situation and so forth? So they told us all to get out. There were very few people there because the rest have been sent to Treblinka. That's another thing, by the way. Every town had a destination, which is a destination where you'll be killed. My town went to a place, Treblinka, not to Auschwitz. Nobody went to Auschwitz. I went to Auschwitz from a different town, but this town was only for Treblinka, which is another terrible concentration camp. And the rest was starving. We all went outside. We were ordered to go outside, and then the shooting began. My mother had me on her lap. I remember that very well, shielding me with her body. Why was the shooting? Because the trains were waiting to take people to Treblinka. And because new trains came for new people, and there wasn't enough space. So shooting, if people didn't die from starvation, they shot them. They just had numbers. Do you know that throughout the whole war, people walked around with paper and pen and pencil and taking numbers down? When I went to Auschwitz as an adult, my number was on a sheet of paper with my tattoo on it. And the day I arrived, they kept great records. They're open now, by the way. So they were getting all of us out of our buildings because they were sending us somewhere else, but they didn't have enough space, enough trucks. So those that were too many people, they just got rid of them. The shooting went on and on until their numbers were correct. So some of the people were taken on trains somewhere, and for some reason, my mother, and about 40, 50 people stayed behind. I remember my mother said, oh my God, they're going to kill us now. Why are we here? And when the trains were leaving, I remember my father yelling, why are they leaving us behind? What's happening? Where are we going? I remember that, okay? The trains went away and we were stayed there, and we found out later on. It was sort of lucky, by the way, because you didn't know what was happening. We were the cleanup squad. They decided, as whenever they moved you to a new place, they cleaned up the old place. Why? Because there's always a feeling that somebody someday is going to come and say, "What did you do?" Accountability. Accountability. So, and they were afraid, by the way, the International Red Cross would periodically come to one of the camps. And they were fooled completely. I am against the Red Cross because of that, because I don't believe that an International Red Cross educated in things like that, in spotting a murder, that they believed the Germans that nothing was happening, that only labor, that we did only work. Nobody was killed. However, the Germans always had in mind, what if they do come? So they cleaned up. So I and my mother and the other 40, 50 people left behind were the cleanup squad, picked up bodies. I remember following my mom. I didn't have to be there, but I was too scared to be alone. I wouldn't let go of her hand, and I followed her, and pick up a leg, pick up clothing soaked in blood and so forth. We did it for months. The place was pristine. I remember walking into a barrack. I call it a barrack. They didn't have yet barracks. They were apartments. The barracks came later, and I knew that there were kids there before. They were, of course, dead. All these kids. They were murdered. But my mother showed me how to fix the pillows and put everything back on the shelf, in case. You don't forget, this Tomaszów, this particular area was going to be completely free of people. I don't know if they put the Polish population there, because we didn't know what happened after that. But when we left, it was supposed to be no sign of murder, because the idea was also leave no witnesses. This was a motto come from Berlin. No witnesses. That's why also they killed the children, because there can be no better witness than a child when they grow up. That's why I am the last one of the few witnesses. That's why they killed the children, not only because they were a nuisance and useless, but they will be witnesses. So therefore, they wanted no witnesses. The place was clean, and I remember my mother saying to my father, "Oh, we did our job. The place is so clean. They're going to kill us. We're not useful anymore." But they didn't. They put us on a truck, and an hour later, we were in a place called Starchowice. It's a town, used to be once a Jewish town, but it was an old army camp that they converted into a labor camp. This camp had barbed wires. The ghetto did not have barbed wires, as far as I remember, but they had soldiers all around, so we couldn't go in and out. But this had barbed wires, and it had towers, 4 towers, with Germans and the machine guns. I knew the sound of a machine gun. I didn't know it was called a machine gun, but I could tell the different sounds of different quick shooting, slow shooting, and so forth. So my mother said to me like this, "I have to teach you some rules," because she wasn't going to be with me. She was working in an ammunition. It was really called Arbeitslager, German word. Really working to help win the war. That was the purpose of it. So they had factories all around, and every morning the people were taken out, my mother, my father, there were no elderly, there were very few children, and they were put on these trucks and taken to this factory. And in the factory, they worked with some kind of a yellow material where they died from it if you inhale it. It's a whole story about that. They called it the Yellow Death. That's what the factory was referred to. So the kids would be me. There weren't many kids left. maybe 20, maybe 30, from thousands, just a few kids. But we had to roam the streets. I was 5.5. So I remember my mother taught me this. Listen, she said, if you see a German coming towards you, stand still. You're not to run. Don't run away. Stand very still. Give him the right of way. Let him pass. And if you're wearing a kerchief, take it off. Whatever on my head. I don't even know what I wore. No eye contact. That's the first time she taught me no eye contact. She said, if you have an eye contact, you become a person. And they begin to recognize you. You're supposed to be invisible. Because you see, you did not know what the rules were. Maybe if you look too long into their eyes, they get upset and shoot you. There were no rules. There were no rules. The rules were to kill, but not exactly what condition, when. So she taught me never to have eye contact. From then on to the end of the war, I only saw the Germans down. They had a buckle, a big buckle here, and I saw their hands. Their hands were holding the dogs, which have been the fear of my life to this day, by the way. I cannot go near a German shepherd, but I was old enough to look into the eyes of the German shepherd. That's where I had eye contact, and I remember their saliva, and the fear was so great. So when I said to her, she said to me, no, don't run. If you run, the dogs are trained to kill if you run, so don't run. Let the person pass. Don't look at the person. Well, she didn't use the word subservient, but she said, put your hands like that and look down. And that's what I learned to do when I saw a German coming. At one time, some adult woman, which I never forgot because I couldn't understand that a big person, a grown-up person, would make a mistake like that. She went face to face with the Gestapo, and there came an announcement. You all have to come to see what happens if you break rules. My mother took me to that. I saw many dead people before that everywhere. But what I didn't see is the cause and effect. I didn't see things. You did this what happens to you. You did this. So she took me and she said, I want you to watch. And that's how I watched my shooting, where the woman had something on her face, something black, like some kind of a rag. Her hands were tied to a pole in the back. Her kids were standing near her, and the guy went and shot her right point blank, right there, and she fell down. And her kids jumped on her body, and my mother said to me, this is what'll happen if you don't obey the rules. And I said, I will. And I said, will you? She said, yes. So I learned very early that this is what's going to happen. Not only, she didn't have to say you'll be killed. She showed me. And that's why my memory is very, very, very strong. But what I remember is the pity I felt for the kids. I said, now they don't have a mama anymore. And I remember that. So when I said to her, you'll be good, I said to my mom, you'll be good. She said, yes, I'll obey. That particular camp, Arbeitslager, working camp, again, they began to move people around, less and less people. The word selection was a common word in my mouth. When I came to America and I went to a Chinese restaurant, and they said, select one from A, select one from B, like Chinese menu, something like that. The word selection was so terrible I couldn't buy the food. I said, I don't want to use the word. I'm not selecting anything. I'm not eating, whatever. It was like ingrained in me because selection meant taking certain people that you didn't know ahead of time. What was the criteria you didn't know? And they were put to their death in many, many different ways. So here we heard that it's a children's selection. That day, my parents didn't go to work. So we had this, but we still were a family, by the way, which is very important for everybody, for me to know. My mother, my father, there were just the three of us. I never had any siblings, so that's it. And they said, okay, we have to hide her. I heard that word, hide her. So what they did, they had like crawl space. So they pushed me into the crawl space, and my mother came with me, and my father didn't go in, and he covered up the cutout so you didn't see the cutout. He hung up clothing. There were hooks there already. They had planned this ahead of time. And from the little window, I saw all the kids I played with. I didn't know any adults. All the kids I played with put on a truck. I knew where the truck was going. I did, and my mother put her hand on my mouth very, very tightly, so I shouldn't make any noise. I wouldn't have made any noise. I was a very well educated and very obedient little girl. I knew what was going on, but just in case, she kept it like that. And for weeks later, I could see there were black and blue marks here. By the way, there were cases where people were hiding together somewhere, 20, 30 people, and one of them had a baby, and the baby cries like babies cry. The mother, without being told, she killed the baby. She would put her hand on the mouth and strangle the baby because she knew. What did she know? You knew that if they were found out, all the 20, 30 people would be shot on the spot. She and the baby would be killed anyhow. And the way they killed babies in order to save a bullet is to throw them against the wall. It was common practice. Now you tell me how anybody can believe this. These same people, by the way, went home to their families and kissed their children and put their kids to bed. And they were Christians, and they said some kind of a prayer to God, now I lay me down to sleep, whatever the prayer is, and love their wives. Those same people, the same human beings, could next door go to work, it's their job, and take a little baby and throw it against the wall where the brains are. So, is it hard to believe? It's hard for me to believe, but I know what happened. Yes, right. So, here we were, no kids anymore. My parents still had to go to work. So my mom, I say my mom. It was also my dad, but my father was the outside man. Remember, information would save you. Information. We found out about the children's selection from my father. He said there'll be a children's selection. We wouldn't have known that. So the next day my mom said to me, you can't walk on the street anymore, because they're going to see you and kill you. So she locked me up, and I was in that room for weeks at a time. I don't know how long I was there. I know that I couldn't go near the window because she put something dark over the window, but I knew one thing. My parents were around. They were taking care of me, and I was going to get food every day at night when they came from work, whatever time it was. I got a meal. The workers, by the way, got an extra meal because they worked for an ammunition factory, and they wanted them to be strong. So I think they fed them 3 times a day, which is unheard of. Auschwitz all over is tiny bit in the morning, a tiny bit at night. This was 3 meals, so my mother saved the food all the time. So when she got home, did I feel safe? Yes, I felt safe. Was I going to stay in that room forever if I have to be? Because I knew the terrible, terrible things that were going outside. One day, again, I don't know timing, because children don't know timing. She said to me, you can go out now. You don't have to be in that room. I want to tell you, I was delighted. I remember walking out. It was beautiful weather outside. It was springtime, and maybe even beginning of the summer. And I remember the air and the sunshine and the sky. And I was out. I was 5 and a half. I was walking outside. No children, of course. And I saw my mother packing. I said, what are you packing? She said, we're going to Auschwitz. I heard the words before. But you know what? I didn't care, in a sense that I knew people were going to Auschwitz. I knew people weren't coming back. But being outside was so delightful to me that when she packed, I don't know what she put in it. We didn't have any pictures. I assumed it was some food. We still thought we were people, So we put maybe some food, maybe some clothing, I don't know. And at somebody's orders, I didn't know any, I couldn't hear orders. I didn't know them. And we started walking towards the train. The cattle cars were waiting, cattle cars. We went, I remember walking in with my mother, was my father, my mother, and me. And she's holding a suitcase, and we come there, and the doors are open. The cattle cars doors are open. My parents are saying goodbye to each other. I didn't know that they were going to be separated. I told you I didn't understand German. I didn't understand the orders. My father was crying, and he was touching me and saying, "Be a good girl." I was so little that my mother was holding my legs. I straddled her body like this. And he went away somewhere with a man in the same cattle car, but with men. And she had trouble getting into the cattle car. They were screaming and yelling to get on, get on. And I saw the dogs. And again, the fear. But this time my mother was holding me. So I knew nothing is going to happen at this moment. She got me into the cattle car. And I remember something which I don't always have, I'll always talk about it. We were one of the first people, and there was one woman sitting on the floor, and we sat down next to her. And she looked at my mother, and she said, "You have a child. You have a child." My 3 children were taken on the wagon, she said. And she asked permission to touch my face. And I remember she took both of her hands, and he touched my face. She said, "Oh, you have a child, but you're going to Auschwitz." I'm just, and then women, more and more. She got up. We had to get up. Then came 30. Are we in a hurry?
No. You've been going 50 minutes.
50?
Yeah, so take as long as you want. I'm just letting you know because there's no clock in here. So
It's okay.
take as long as you want.
I got permission to speak more. Do you know what? I really appreciate this because first I get carried away because I'm there. I'm not here. I'm there. And then I speak to classes, and the classes have to go on. The bell rings no matter where I am, and they have to go to their next class. Apparently this is different. So I can take you along a little bit, and most of all, I want questions after I finished. So we stood. I want to tell you, the trip was 36 hours. I did not know that till years later. Now, just imagine all the women, only women, standing very close to each other. The heat was intolerable. We were sweating. We were wet from just the heat. And the smell. I said, "Mom, I got to go to the bathroom." And she said to me, "So I realized you got to go where you stand." But I could smell it. We have become what the German called us, inhuman. Because after you go through this in a cattle car, no food, no water, no air almost, going wherever you stood, you became like an animal. And people were crying. Some people died. I remember falling asleep, my head on the woman in front of me, just like that. I didn't have to hold up my body because the bodies held me up. This lasted, I said 36 hours. We arrived to Auschwitz, and the first thing I saw were the dogs. I can't tell you the feeling I have to German Shepherds. To this day, when I live near a dog park where I live in a nice town in New Jersey, really nice, and it's Jewish town, a lot of Jews and synagogues. I see a German Shepherd, even if he speaks Hebrew, which of course he doesn't. You know, I have to cross the street. I have to cross the street. I get hot. I get like anxiety, and I'm not in such a, I don't have these issues, but so I keep away from German Shepherd. But here I am in Auschwitz, and I'm facing them again. And my mother said, "Stand still." And I do. And then I I said, what is this terrible smell? The terrible smell inside was, I knew what it was. I could recognize it. Feces and throw up and all that. But this was something brand new. She pointed, these are the bodies burning, she told me. Did not protect me. I said, oh, that's where they put all those dead bodies. It was logical to me. Oh, that's what they do. I was wondering where all these dead bodies will be going to. So within a very short time, I'm going to skip a little bit, she said, get undressed. I said, why? I told you, remember, our clothing were always confiscated because they were still good clothes and they were needed in Germany. So my clothes went, I was naked, and naked people, first of all, they're inhuman. Clothing gives you a certain type of protection. You know, it talks about you. If you're rich, if you're poor, your style. If you're naked, there is nothing. We all look alike. We just skin and bones. We aren't anything. So here we are, all the women got undressed, and I said, why? She said, because if our bodies isn't perfect, we got to go to the crematorium. I learned right away, and I kept asking, am I okay? She said, yes. I said, what about you? She says, I'm okay too. I trusted her. She told me the dogs will not eat me up or kill me because I witnessed dogs ripping people apart, just like I witnessed children being thrown against the wall. But the dogs, to watch a dog eat up, destroy a person in front of you, it's hard to even it's hard to even talk about it. So I trusted her. Now I trusted her that I should get undressed and that I'll be okay. I'll pass. We got our clothes back. Question: why wasn't I killed? One miracle was they didn't find me. They didn't find me in the crawl space. The second is I was visible to everybody. I wrote a book, The Daughter of Auschwitz. My co-writer was a reporter who did a lot of research in general. That's his job. He works for PBS, and everything he does, he researches. That's the way you're supposed to do. He couldn't find the reason why my transport, they left me. I was the only child. Why they left me, why I wasn't killed right away. Some book I read very little about the Holocaust. I just don't want to hear. I don't want to. I had enough. I don't do it. But this one book I did read was a professor who came to Rutgers University, and he claimed that this particular transport arrived on a Sunday. And Sunday, since the Germans were Christians, can you believe it? They were Christians. I don't know what kind of Christians they were. I don't know what God they prayed to. I don't know what Bible they used, but they were Christians, and they didn't want to work so hard. They had 4 crematoriums going. They didn't want a 5th one. They figured, well, I'm coming to a place called Birkenau. Birkenau was only one thing. Auschwitz-Birkenau was for extermination. No work was done. Other camps had many camps of work. This was just waiting for death. So they figure, if not now, later on. But before I got into the barracks, they shaved my head. They shaved. So here we were. We really became not human. No hair, no clothes. We got into the barrack, and my mother began teaching me again. She said, listen, you'll get a bowl, a tin bowl, and a tin cup, and a tin spoon. People are going to try to steal it from you because the people who dole out the food don't look at you. You're not a person. If they see the bowl, they put food into the bowl, whatever there is, soup, whatever. But if you don't have a bowl, you won't get it. The person who stole it from you will have 2 bowls. But nobody's going to know that. They just put. So I began to hide my bowl. Nothing was ever stolen from me. I learned how at 5 and a half to make sure that I put the bowl in a certain spot, and I watched it so nobody took it. And then I learned not to go to the bathroom when I wanted to, only to go with the rest of the group twice a day. And I also learned to stand still when they counted us. In the beginning, I told you they have different identifications. First, they had cards, IDs with it, and so forth. The end was tattooing. But till then, till the tattoo came, they started counting us, and you were outside. And I always tried to be in the back, the only child. And they let me be in the back of the group. But one time when I wasn't, and I moved a little bit because I couldn't stand still for so many hours, I was taken out of the roll call of that group, and a woman started hitting me, but I remember very hard on my cheeks, and I remember saying to myself, "Don't cry, don't cry." And I said in my thoughts, "Go ahead, kill me. You won't know how much you hurt me." Not a sound, but I was taught that. It wasn't something that came to my head. If you cry inside your head. You don't cry outside, because you know what they found out, and what my mother didn't tell me, but she sort of implied that if you get hurt and the people who hurt you see you in pain, they get more pleasure out of it. If you don't react while you get hurt, their pleasure is less. And somehow, I don't know how I learned it as a child, but I remember never to letting anybody know that anything bothers me. So she hit me so many times until she got tired. Okay, after a quick time, I got very sick, and I knew something. This sickness meant death. Useless people are sick. I got sick, but I recuperated all on my own. And after that, they took me to what is called the children's camp, and I didn't see my mother anymore. But all the things that she taught me, I learned and I remembered. I tried not to be so visible. I didn't, if a German came into the barrack, there was absolutely no eye contact. I tried to be as not noticed as possible. But they tattooed me, and they told me no more my name. My name is 27,633. I didn't know what that was. Didn't know I couldn't read or write or the numbers, but I knew the sound of it. It was a phrase. I learned it. So when somebody called, here, I'm here, because I heard the sound of it. I'm going to go skip a little bit because I am tired and you may want to have questions and so forth. So all of a sudden, we're told we're getting a fabulous breakfast. Now, I want to tell you again, hunger was all, it gets into your bones, into your thought process. Somebody once asked, I read that, tell me, did you ever think of God in Auschwitz? And it was an adult. And the person said, of course I thought of God. The name was bread, in a sense that that's all you wanted is bread. Nothing else mattered. So we were going to have a meal. Wow, a great breakfast. I knew why. They were taking us to the gas chambers. Before you went, you got a meal. It was very cold outside. We had this fabulous meal. I didn't care what would happen afterwards. We started walking to the gas chambers, and things happened in between, but I can't discuss this now. We got to the gas chambers, and it was a gigantic room, twice the size, gray, with cement floors, and there were like numbers all around with hooks, and they told you, when you go to the shower and you come back, make sure you know where your clothes are. Now, we all know we're not coming back, but everybody looked where the clothes are. I don't know what happened. Another miracle, I don't know. We stayed there for hours and hours and hours and hours, and it was freezing. We were naked. Again, being naked was the style. Nakedness. So kids were naked standing, and after a while they sent us back. A very short time after that, my mother appears. I forgot all about her. I didn't forget. I just didn't have that feeling of, I just did. Nobody had parents, so I didn't feel different from any of the other children. Everybody was tattooed. Everybody was starving. We were like one group, of that's how life is. That's how it is if you're a Jew. We were all Jewish. We were all from Poland. That's the way life is. When she appeared, I was just shocked. I couldn't recognize her. She looked terrible. And that's what she said to me. She said, the Russians are coming and the Germans are running away. But they want to take us with them because remember, no witnesses. They don't want the Russians to come and see what they did in Auschwitz. So they're pushing us all under duress to walk to Germany. And she said, look at me, I'm going to die. You may survive. I don't want you to survive like that, she said. I don't want you to live by yourself in this world. This is not a world for children. I want you to die with me in Auschwitz. Will you die with me here? I said, yes. I was very happy to be with her and to die any place as long as I was with her. And she took my hand and we snuck out of the barrack and she found a hospital, but it was her plan. I knew nothing about the hospital. And she began to she looked for a corpse. And she found a corpse that was still warm so she could manipulate the body. She said, climb in. She took off my shoes and I climbed with the corpse and she covered me up and she said, don't breathe much. I don't want anybody to know that you're here. I got it. I understood right away. And she disappeared. And I don't know how long later, I heard the door open and it's screaming and the Germans are walking in and they're looking at every corpse. They were shooting people who couldn't even get out of bed. They were so sick. They were like, it was a madness at the end. Some of them, as I watched, as we were sneaking into the hospital, they had taken off their uniforms and putting on prisoners' uniforms and shooting anybody that was moving. And the dogs were like wild. So it was so noisy. So that hospital was sort of quiet. But then I heard them walking in and somebody stopped by my bed. I stopped breathing. And the person was dead. There was a dead woman there. So it wasn't like, she certainly wasn't faking. And they went on. In no time, I smelled smoke. I didn't get uncovered because my mother said, only I will uncover you. Because when the Germans left, they tried again, leave no witnesses, leave no trace of the atrocities. They began to burn the barracks. So they burned the hospital, and there was smoke everywhere. All of a sudden, she's there. She uncovers me, and these are her words. They're gone. This was January 1945, January 25th. The Russians came 27th, January 27th. So that's how I and my mother were saved. She had another corpse. She hid with another corpse. And we all walked towards the barbed wire, which were electrified, waiting for the Russians to come, for the Russian troop. And later on, we found my father, who was in Dachau, a camp in Germany, and we met in the Polish town where my parents were born, in that town. They went back to their hometown. And that's how we survived. I hope it wasn't too long for you. I'm sorry if it is. And that's what.
So it's over an hour, so maybe about 15 minutes for questions.
Yeah, I just want to ask you. I just want to say one thing. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to continue the Jewish nation and so forth. And I've got a wonderful grandchild. Noah is sitting here with me. He travels. My grandchildren travel with me upon their request and my request. I could not have maneuvered the airport. Auschwitz was one thing, but the airport. Especially Chicago airport. Well, and he was like my light in this traveling, and it just makes me warms my heart to look at my grandchildren, especially this fabulous boy. So I just wanted to say that. And any questions are fine.
Yeah. We have about 15 minutes for questions, so if maybe, is there like the microphone? Do you want a chair to sit for the questions?
No, I can stand, but I don't know.
Yeah, if anyone needs to leave, that's fine. We have a, can I borrow this for a second? I think we have a microphone somewhere right over here that we could send, because otherwise we won't be able to hear it. Is that on? Okay. Let you have that, and we'll see if we can.
Well, if you can ask me now loud enough so I can hear you, well, you're close. So you have to, yeah.
Jed, it's working now.
What do you say? What?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Hold something.
Yeah, something about holding to go to the bathroom.
You learn a lot of things when you have to. You know, if you have to weigh, you're controlling your bowel movements or dying. No contest, right? You do the things what you have to do, no matter how old you are, if you could understand the language.
We have a question right over here.
Hi, how are you this afternoon? My name is Joyce Wood, and I'm from Arizona, now an Iowa person. I just moved to Cedar Rapids. This is my dad, Raymond Black, and he was from Cahokia, Missouri, and he was in Army Signal Corps. So maybe he was one of the people that your father saw when the Army...
Too long, I won't be able to understand it. Please ask me a question.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a question, you know, how did you survive in Poland? I've read reports that the Polish were not kind towards the Jews.
Okay, well, we came to Poland.
Yeah.
Very inhospitable people, very anti-Semitic, very mean. When we got back, alone, hungry and tired, just me and my mom, not knowing who was even alive, the first neighbor that she met said to her, "What are you doing here? We thought Hitler killed you all." Terrible place. They called me dirty Jew. I couldn't go to school. I did not go to school until I was, I think, about 9 years old, and we left Poland. I could not go to school in Poland. They were so mean, the kids and the teachers.
Also, she said her dad was in the army that helped liberate Dachau.
Oh, your dad was in American Army? And he liberated Dachau. I have to thank him because he liberated my father.
One of the very first, so...
Thank you very... He's a hero to me.
Over there. I was just wondering how your experiences have shaped your relationship to the Jewish faith and culture.
How have your experiences shaped your relationship to your Jewish faith?
To the Jewish what?
Faith, to your
Jewish faith. Ah, Jewish faith. Hitler wanted to destroy the Jewish faith. I do the opposite. I'm very, very, very Jewish. Thank you. I raised my family, my children, very Jewish. I lived in Israel for 10 years. I taught at the Hebrew University. I speak Hebrew and Yiddish fluently. My faith is very, very strong, although I have some problem with God once in a while. But you see, being a Jew, we have the quality, we talk to God. He's not I don't know, the God that we believe in is not perfect. He made a lot of mistakes, and we talked to him about that. So, but I'm very, very, I'm kosher. I'm careful what I eat. I'm very Jewish. A very proud Jewish woman, and so is my family. Thank you.
We have a question from the audience. How long did it take before you began to feel or you felt like things were back to normal for you?
Before what?
Until you felt like you were back to normal. Like how long after?
You think I'm normal? I never thought of myself as being normal. You know, you can never be, that doesn't mean that I have any serious issues, but you're never without it. And if I forget, my number reminds me. You're not like everybody else. You can't be. You can't be. But I hope it's for the better and not for the worst. So.
I have a question over here. My question is, everything that was going on around you in the camps, were you still able to find any kind of humor or laughter at all on a day-to-day basis with anything?
Did you ever find any joy or happiness while you were at the camps? Was there ever any moments?
No, there was no joy or happiness at the camp, except that the woman who tattooed me to this day, by the way, she was killed. She was 18, 19 years old, Jewish. I knew she didn't like doing what she did. And that sort of gave me, and she said to me, if you survive, you could get a long sleeve shirt. In other words, she gave me hope. And I said to myself, that lady doesn't want to do what she's doing. It was that kind of thing, if you want to talk about happy. That's it. That was the level of positive things.
Thank you for coming. This is an annual event. I want to thank the Dr. Thaler Foundation for doing this. My question is, do you know Michael Bornstein? He's been here a couple times.
What is that?
Do you know Michael Bornstein?
Oh, my friend Michael.
Yeah.
Michael, yes.
Michael stood right next to me
So
when
you
we were
two-
given when we took the numbers. Yeah, Michael and two people, Michael and Sarah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and Michael is a graduate of the University of Iowa.
Michael, what?
He graduated from the University of Iowa.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he talks about you in his talk. I've heard him speak twice. He was here last year, and then in 2019.
I know. I'm here because of him. They
Yes.
called me, and they said, you know what they said? Do you want to meet wonderful people? I said, yeah, I'll go anyway to meet wonderful people. Go to Iowa.
Well,
And you know what?
when you get
He
back,
wasn't wrong.
when you get back to New Jersey, tell him. I'm sure there are other people here that remember him and
Thank
his
you.
story and his daughter Debbie because she was
Absolutely.
on TV here.
She what?
She was a TV broadcaster.
Yes, she is.
Yes.
She
And
is.
you're now famous because you were on Charity Nebby's radio show.
I was on so many shows and
Well-
television. Oh, by the way, those who are young at heart, go on TikTok. Because my grandson, Noah's twin brother, Aaron, put me on TikTok. Right now I got 500,000 followers, and there were 50 million visitors. Is that called visitors?
Hits.
Viewers. I don't watch it, by the way. I didn't know what TikTok was, but yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I will tell them that you remember them. They'll be very happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, two questions actually. One of them is, how did you end up here in America? And two, how do you feel about the German people now?
Oh, how do you feel about Germany?
Yeah, and how did you get to America? Was that-
And what?
How did you get to America?
Oh, how did I get to America? You want to hear irony of ironies? We were in Poland. The people who were our saviors, the Russians, became our enemies. They refused to they became communists, couldn't get out of Poland. They closed all the borders, so we had to sneak out of Poland. Where did we go? Germany. Weird? Why to Germany? We were looking for the Americans. Berlin was divided into 4 different countries, 4 quarters. I think it was Russia, English, American, and whatever, I don't remember. And British, right. So we got to the American sector, and from there we went to displaced people, came for a few years, and from there we went to America. So now you ask me about Germany. I have very hard time reconciling myself with a modern Germany, which I know has been very positive to Israel, and I'm a Zionist. I lived in Israel, and I feel very close to Israel, so I'm grateful for that, because they help a lot of refugees because they give them money and help them rebuild their life. But the language is still the language of the German Gestapo. And somebody once asked me, will you visit Germany? I said, with pleasure, but you have to change your language. So.
I would just like to ask, after what you went through as a child, what was it that allowed you to ever again have faith in the rest of humanity?
Sorry, what was the last part?
What was it that ever allowed you to have faith again in the rest of humanity?
What helped you regain faith in humanity?
What helped me regain faith? Well, you know, love helps. I fell in love with my husband when I was 12. He spoke my language, he spoke Yiddish, and he bought me a sandwich. What else do I need? That's all I needed. And then I had wonderful children. Life was very positive for a very long time. Today, by the way, is his anniversary of his death. Today, 3 years. I'm sorry he's not here to see what's going on and so forth. But we had a 60-year-old marriage. So what helps you regain is you do meet fabulous, wonderful people. I became a social worker, a therapist. I had luck after I came to America. And that the positive things began to sort of darken or make the negative less strong. It faded a little bit, although it never does completely.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. If there's any.
I got one down here. I'm coming.
First, thank you for coming. I just want to know what your relationship is with fear today and how years since you've maintained resilience.
Your relationship with what?
Fear.
Oh, with fear. Your relationship with fear.
With what?
Fear. With fear?
Fear?
Yeah.
Relationship with fear then.
Today.
Now.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very question I never thought about. I am sort of fearless. I don't know how and why. I live alone now, and I'm okay, even if I hear funny sounds in the middle of the night. You know, I say, oh, well, my old house is settling down. I never think of a burglar or anybody else. I mean, yeah, for some reason, rather than being a fearful person, I'm not. And I have to think about that. I never thought. It's a very, very good psychological question. Thank you. Yeah, I'm fearless. I mean, I'll tell you a quick question. When I went to Jefferson High School, not like the Jefferson here, it was a really tough high school in Brooklyn, and there were some gangs. And one day, a guy from a gang did not let me into the doors outside. He was standing outside. There weren't any teachers around, and he was looking at me in a very, scary way. And I said to myself, you don't know what being scared is. Who do you think you are? And I stood still, and I just didn't even budge. I looked at him, he looked at me. He was the one who lowered his eyes, and he let me in and never bothered me again. You know? It's true. You know, nobody can intimidate me anymore. They don't know what intimidation is. So I better not say it out loud in case somebody's going to intimidate me here. But, thank you. It's
Thank
a very
you.
good question.
Thank you.
Perfect. We have time for both, yeah.
What's the question?
Are you sorry you went through all the experiences that you went through?
Are you sorry that you went through all those experiences?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you sorry for all the experiences you went through?
I don't know. I don't think like this. I don't know. I'm sorry I lost my family. I'm sorry I don't have aunts and uncles and cousins and never knew my grandparents. I don't know. But I did say to my father, had he been aware of the world, the way all young people should be aware now, my life would have been different. But who knows? I don't play the game, what if? You don't know. That's a good question.
Yes, last question from our friends over in Iowa Hall. What advice can you give a new parent to teach their children looking toward a more positive future?
What advice would you give a new parent about being positive into the future?
Parents?
Yeah, new parent.
Well, the first thing I want to tell parents, by the way, I wasn't a great mother, so I really can't give that good advice. I can tell you how to be a good grandmother, much better. Is American parents cuddle their children much too much. They protect them too much. It's not fair. It's really not fair. American parents are very dishonest to their children. For instance, I was in this restaurant, and this little 4-year-old was sitting with the parents, and while they were waiting for their food, the waitress gave them a piece of paper for the kid, for the little boy, and crayon, and he made a circle. A 4-year-old can make a circle, right? Both parents jumped up and said, "Oh my God, you're a genius." I said to myself, this is terrible. They're giving the kid such a false idea about success. I think American parents are so complimentary when there are no compliments. There is a difference between compliments and encouragement. You can encourage your kids until the end of your life. I want to encourage my grown-up children, some of them have gray hair. I don't, but they do. So I encourage, but being falsely positive. My mother didn't do that. Had she done it, I would be dead. And I think the world is tough nowadays. My grandkids are in college, sitting in a room, can't go out. They don't have all the activities we had 20 years ago in colleges because of COVID and other things. You have to teach them reality, because outside it's very, very difficult. And you have to leave your family with courage. And you don't get courage unless you know reality. That's my opinion, just my opinion.